The federal government believed it had secured a 30-day pause on any Canadian exports to the U.S., that is, on tariffs on any Canadian exports to the U.S. Canada sends about $11 billion worth of steel south of the border each year, or about 90% of total production. It also exports an equivalent dollar figure in aluminum, which accounts for more than half of American consumption. Here's Donald Trump speaking to reporters on Air Force One about tomorrow's planned tariff announcement.
What countries will those go on?
Everybody. Steel.
Including Canada and Mexico?
Yeah. Any steel coming into the United States is going to have a 25% tariff.
What about aluminum?
Aluminum too.
10%? Or
25%.
25 for both?
25 for both.
Are you going to retaliate? Is Canada a viable country?
No comment from Prime Minister Justin Trudeau on Trump's latest announcement. Trudeau is in Paris tonight as he prepares to attend a conference while meeting with EU leaders in hopes to strengthen trade alliances there. Ottawa has previously vowed to retaliate if the U.S. imposes tariffs on Canada. Now let's get more now on this breaking news story from Tricia Kindleman. Tricia, these remarks about tariffs on steel and aluminum.
So here we are examining what these comments could mean for Canada, and not just Canada. You know, for Mexico, of course, we know that they are another major trading partner with the U.S. But as Donald Trump said this evening, that these tariffs is 25% on aluminum and steel would be applied to all aluminum and steel coming into the United States. So that will be when it comes from any country that it does business with. There was a lot of discussion towards the latter part of last week about allowing some Chinese investment into their steel company. Now, Trump did say that they weren't going to go that far and let them invest in U.S. steel. But again, just throwing all of these sort of trade deals and things for a loop, to say the least. Now, I wanted to touch on, Deanna, we heard at the end of that clip there where we showed our Prime Minister walking in Paris there. One of the reporters yelling, "Is Canada a viable country?"
Yeah, so, I believe it was the voice of our colleague Ashley Burke. Yes, I'm not sure, but it sounds like Ashley.
It did. I do believe that you may be right on that it might have been Ashley Burke. But regardless, someone did yell, "Is Canada a viable country?" Now, of course, as Canadians, we're standing here saying, yes, of course it is. Now, I want to show you this part of the Air Force One press conference that we had earlier, where Trump seems to question whether Canada is a viable country or not.
And in the case of Canada, if this should happen, I don't know how they can do it without us, because without the U.S., Canada really doesn't have a country. They do almost all of their business with us. And if we say we want our cars to be made in Detroit, with a stroke of a pen, I can do that. And other things in addition to that would not allow Canada to be a viable country.
Now, given the threats of these tariffs that we've been under for a matter of weeks now, Deanna, that has definitely sparked the conversation amongst provincial leaders, amongst federal leaders about, this trade arrangement and this relationship that we do have with the country of the United States. Now, there has definitely been a lot of questions that have been brought up about the figures that Donald Trump is saying, hundreds of billions of dollars in deficit to America when it comes to our trade figures. Now, that doesn't necessarily seem to add up. One of the people who has been really out on the forefront, though, asking the questions about these figures that Donald Trump is bringing to the table has been Doug Ford. Of course, now you heard him say if we wanted cars produced in Detroit, a stroke of the pen, I could do that. Doug Ford was one of the first to respond this evening. Here's what he had to say in a post on social media. He said, "Now this is the next 4 years, shifting goalposts and constant chaos, putting our economy at risk." He went on to say, of course, now he is in the middle of his own election campaign, we have to bear in mind. That's why he notes here, "I'm asking for the people for a strong, stable 4-year mandate that outlast the Trump administration to do whatever it takes to be ready to protect Ontario." We also have seen a number of these meetings of the provincial leaders, the premiers, and we are expecting for those gatherings to continue. But at this point, there are a lot of questions. And of course, now we have to also address, Deanna, a lot of those questions around the 51st state comments. Those were also something that have been heavily focused on. Here's what he had to say.
But just yes or no, is he planning to annex
part
Canada?
Of his policy. Well, I don't think there's any plans to invade Canada, if that's what you're talking about. But there is a lot of people that like what we have in the United States and do not like the last 10 years of liberal progressive governance in Trudeau. But really what you're seeing is a reassertion of American leadership in the Western Hemisphere from the Arctic all the way down to the Panama Canal. And that's what we're talking about, from Greenland to Arctic security, to the Panama Canal coming back under the United States. America has avoided our own hemisphere where we have the energy, the food, and the critical minerals for way too long, and you're seeing a reassertion of President Trump's leadership.
So, of course, that was a National Defense Secretary there who was, again, talking about these, National Defense Administrator, rather, talking about these steps that, you know, we're seeing but not seeing as it continues to, again, as Ford kind of said, these moving goalposts seem to continually come into play here, Deanna.
Oh, the Canadian Steel Producers Association, and she joins us tonight from Ottawa. Catherine, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you, Deanna, for having me. Pardon me.
Catherine, I can tell you our jaws dropped here in the newsroom when we found out about the news and got that video from Air Force One. What was your reaction?
Well, certainly we're very concerned, but I'm trying to remain focused on a couple of facts. One is we do not yet know the details. We do not, for example, know whether for sure Canada would be included. I would hope that our primary objective as a country is to get us excluded from these tariffs. And I think that we have a very compelling story to tell as Canada. We've done some incredible things to seek that. But if these tariffs proceed, it's like they will be devastating, but challenging on both sides of the border, in fact, not just on Canada. So as the United States' largest trading partner on steel, we represent about 20% of all of their steel imports, and they represent about 40% of ours. So we are very highly integrated, very dependent on each other economically, and tariffs will have devastating effects on both sides of the border. So job one needs to be to get Canada excluded from what looks to be, at least if we take President Trump at his word during the press conference, something quite broadly based on many countries.
Just wanted to clarify, just because we got a chance to watch the entire tape, there were some follow-up questions. People did ask him, are Canada and Mexico exempt from that, given the 30-day reprieve that the two countries had negotiated? He said they're not exempt. So that, at least from what we know for now, it seems like the exemption does not hold. But as you said, so much is still unclear in how this will fold out.
Well, this is what I'm hoping is happening as we speak. I'm hoping the Canadian government is connecting with the Trump administration to once again remind them of the work we have done to align our trade policy, of the economic harm we'll have on both sides of the border, of the highly integrated nature of our business, and the $20 billion of steel trade that's basically exposed to this idea. So, you know, again, as their largest trading partner in steel, I think we actually, and as one that has worked extremely hard to align with U.S. trade policy, taken direct measures against China, for example, I think we have a better and supply chain transparency. No one else in any other trading relationship on steel has done this but Canada and the United States. So I think we have a very strong narrative to advance tonight. If that doesn't happen, then we have a very strong necessity to respond hard and fast with retaliatory tariffs of our own.
What I wanted to ask you is, when you mentioned that figure, $20 billion, we know that 90% of Canada's steel exports do go to the U.S. These are huge figures, almost too big to wrap your head around. Tell us, what could this possibly do to the Canadian economy? And I want to ask you about the U.S. economy as well, but primarily to Canadian steel producers, to all the people who are employed in these industries. What would the impact be?
It will be devastating. Now, I will say that we do ship, it's not quite 90% of our production, it's a little over 50%. But what we need to, the other thing we need to pivot to, and you're alluding to this, is we need to find mechanisms immediately to use more domestically produced steel in Canadian projects. Like, there's no reason why some of the largest infrastructure projects that have gone on in this country in the last decade did not use Canadian steel. That needs to change tomorrow.
Tell me, is there, I mean, a question everyone has to ask themselves when it does come to Donald Trump and this news cycle of his edicts and executive orders of the last 2-3 weeks, could this be another negotiating tactic? What's your feeling on that?
Well, that's what I'm hoping is taking place, and that the Canadian government is having these discussions to see what this is all about, to reinforce what we've done. You know, as I've mentioned, many other nations have not done a direct action on overcapacity of steel like Canada and the United States. They have not done supply chain transparency like Canada and the United States. So, frankly, you know, perhaps he's negotiating with other parts of the world. That's what I hope. Again, who knows? And I'm just trying to advise that we don't actually know the details today.
What can Canada and other countries, steel industry in other countries, do about this? We do know that the EU is very much in Donald Trump's crosshairs when it comes to tariffs and other economic sanctions. We do know that this is very much something that Prime Minister Justin Trudeau is talking about to Emmanuel Macron and other European leaders. What do you think Canada can do and its allies to prepare themselves for the possible impact of this?
Again, I think for us, we believe that the best thing we can do is to strengthen the Canadian domestic market for steel. And there's two ways to do that. I mentioned one, but the other one is even more important, which is to keep unfairly traded dumped steel out of our country. So we need to keep that from entering into our country so that we can supply more Canadian steel in Canada, so that we're not being undercut and undermined by unfairly traded offshore imports.
Catherine, thank you so much for that. I know more details will become known in the days to come, but I really appreciate you responding this early in the game. Thank you, Catherine.
Yeah, thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Catherine Cobden is the president and CEO of the Canadian Steel Producers Association.